Harriet Grayson had spent most of her adult life tending to the rhythms of the post in Silverwood Cross. Mornings were for sorting letters and parcels, afternoons for preparing shipments, and the occasional lull between customers for tidying up or reading the local newspaper. She loved the gentle routine, punctuated by the pleasant chime of the bell on the door whenever a neighbour came by to send off a letter or pick up a package. Indeed, in Silverwood Cross, everyone seemed to know everyone, and Harriet took pride in being a small but vital part of community life. Silverwood Cross itself was a placid, windswept village by the sea. Mild breezes carried the brine of the ocean up the narrow lanes, and gulls often perched along the rooftops of the quaint cottages. The village's claim to fame was its ancient lighthouse, standing on an outcrop of rugged coast a few miles away. No one tended the lighthouse anymore. Electric beacons had replaced the need for a keeper, and the old tower had fallen into desuetude. Persistent rumors claimed that vagrants used it for shelter, or that it was haunted by the spirits of long-deceased sailors, but no one took those stories too seriously. So, it stood out in Harriet's mind the day she noticed mail postmarked from that lighthouse. She'd been flipping through the day's inbound mail, a customary double-check before she stamped everything and distributed it to the appropriate mailboxes. Usually she would watch for incorrectly addressed items or unusual postage rates. That morning, however, she froze upon seeing a slightly damp, sea-scented postcard that bore a neat postmark reading Silverwood Lighthouse. It perplexed her, because the old building wasn't in operation, let alone equipped with any official postal mechanisms. Curiosity piqued, Harriet examined it closely. On the back of the postcard, there was no message to speak of, just a series of small circles and triangles drawn in black ink, and most curious of all, no recipient's address. She let the postcard sit on her worn oak counter while she finished sorting the rest of the mail, but her mind kept returning to that bizarre bit of correspondence. Who would have the authority, or perhaps the creativity, to create a postmark claiming to be from an abandoned lighthouse? During her lunch break, she quietly tucked the postcard into her handbag, determined to investigate further. Silverwood Cross had always felt safe and open, the kind of town where mysteries were more about misplaced kittens than clandestine postal clues. Still, the postcard hinted at something secret, potentially sinister, and Harriet couldn't help feeling a little thrill. That afternoon, Harriet considered confiding in her friend and neighbour Millicent Willoughby. Millicent was a librarian turned amateur historian with a passion for old documents and cryptography. She spent her retirement helping to digitize the archives of the county library, occasionally providing Harriet with fascinating tidbits from the past. If any local mind was equipped to parse strange markings on a postcard, Harriet was sure it was Millicent's. After closing the post office, Harriet strolled up the steep lane toward Millicent's ivy-covered cottage. The evening sun glinted on the window panes, casting long shadows across the cobblestones. Harriet found Millicent in her garden, stooped over a patch of lavender. As soon as Harriet presented the mysterious postcard, Millicent wiped her hands on her apron, put on her reading glasses and studied the markings. "They're not letters, nor do they seem to be typical mathematical symbols," she commented. "More like code. You'd be surprised how often circles and triangles have been used in various ciphers, especially in times of war." "It's odd, don't you think?" Harriet said, shifting from foot to foot. "A postmark from the lighthouse of all places." "Very odd indeed. You should keep an eye on any more that come in." Over the following week, Harriet doubled her vigilance. She scanned every piece of mail for the same suspicious stamp. On the third day she found another postcard, the same neat, off-kilter postmark of Silverwood Lighthouse, the same pungent smell of salt, and a string of new symbols on the back. If anything, the pattern was more complex. Circles, triangles, then some squares. Again, there was no address, no typical postage markings beyond the faux postmark. She took the new postcard to Millicent, who frowned in concentration as she laid them side by side. "It's a progression," Millicent said slowly. Either that, or different messages altogether. The question is, are these being left for the post office to find, or is someone else meant to pick them up? Harriet hadn't considered that angle. Who was the intended recipient of these cryptic postcards? They were delivered to the sorting area, but had no name or address. Yet they bore official stamps, a mixture of old ones from the 1960s and some relatively modern ones. After rummaging in her desk, Harriet grabbed a magnifying glass to examine the stamps. They were all British in origin, but from different eras, as if someone had collected them over years. This only deepened the mystery. The next day, as Harriet was about to lock up, a tall, slender man with slicked-back hair entered the post office. He was wearing a charcoal grey suit and carried a battered leather briefcase. Harriet recognized him. Russell Fane, a real estate agent who'd recently opened an office in the old clockmaker's building. People in town had described him as polite enough, though somewhat aloof. He rarely frequented Harriet's establishment, so his sudden appearance drew her attention. She smiled politely and asked if he needed help. "Just dropping off some letters," he said. He approached the counter and placed 3 cream-colored envelopes on it. "They're urgent, so please see that they go out first thing tomorrow." Harriet assured him they would. As she took the envelopes, she couldn't help noticing the small spots of sand clinging to the bottom of his briefcase. It might mean nothing. Plenty of folks in Silverwood Cross walked the beach. But Harriet's instincts began to tingle. She watched as Russell left, the brass bell jingling overhead. That evening, Harriet studied the postcards with growing conviction that something underhanded was happening. Could Russell be connected to these cryptic messages? The battered briefcase, the flecks of sand, his subtle tension as he spoke, these details all fanned the flames of her suspicion. Harriet decided that the only way to get answers was to investigate the lighthouse itself. The following Sunday offered a cloudless sky, so Harriet donned a sturdy pair of shoes and set out after lunchtime. The path toward the lighthouse was dotted with driftwood and pieces of dried seaweed, and the surf roared like distant thunder. Finally, she reached the base of the cliff upon which the lighthouse perched. Up close, the structure looked like something from a Gothic novel. Paint peeling from the walls, broken windows, and a large wooden door padlocked shut. As Harriet tested the door, she found it sealed. Disappointed but undeterred, she circled around the tower. Weeds and wild grasses brushed against her ankles. Then she spotted a small side entrance, a rusted metal door with a damaged knob. A gentle push opened it, and the door screeched in protest, echoing within the hollow interior. Harriet's heart hammered in her chest. The old keeper's quarters were dusty, lit only by shards of sunlight piercing the clinging gloom. She stepped cautiously, ears alert for any sound besides her own footsteps. In the corner of one musty room stood a makeshift table. On it, Harriet found a half-burnt candle, a fountain pen, and a battered journal. The journal was mostly blank except for a few lines. "There is another shipment Friday. Must confirm route. Postcards in place." She blinked at the cryptic mention of a shipment. Was someone shipping artifacts through Silverwood Cross in secret? Even more peculiar, Harriet glimpsed a small inked stamp with the words "Silverwood Lighthouse" carved onto a rubber block. So this was the source of the false postmark. A wave of apprehension flooded her. Whoever was orchestrating these postcards was using this space for clandestine communication. If Harriet had any doubt before, it was now replaced by certainty. Someone was using the abandoned lighthouse as a hub for espionage. A scraping sound from the next room made Harriet's blood run cold. She hastily shoved the journal back onto the table and tiptoed behind a tall crate. Footsteps, slow and measured, echoed as if searching. Harriet crouched and held her breath, heart pounding painfully. Through a gap, she glimpsed a pair of black loafers. She closed her eyes, waiting, hardly daring to breathe. Eventually, the footsteps receded. She risked a glance. The intruder was gone. Without wasting another moment, Harriet slipped back through the side door, sprinted across the brush, and didn't relax until she'd reached the safety of the main path, panting. Back at home, Harriet considered calling the local constable, but she hesitated. Inspector Havers was pleasant enough, yet Harriet worried he might dismiss the postcards as idle pranks. Besides, she had very little evidence beyond rumor and a personal hunch. Instead, she went next door to confide her findings to Millicent. The older woman's eyes lit with concern. "I know, Inspector Havers," Millicent said. "If we just show him these postcards, he might not take it seriously. We need more concrete proof that these are espionage messages." Harriet nodded. "I found a journal, but it had very little in it. Something about a shipment on Friday, and confirming route. Then it mentioned postcards, and I saw a rubber stamp with the Lighthouse postmark." "We should probably keep watch on Friday then," Millicent concluded. "If there's going to be a shipment, maybe we'll see who's behind all this. I can help. I've always wanted to be part of a real-life mystery." They laughed nervously, feeling both excited and slightly foolish. Harriet spent the rest of the week in tense anticipation. Whenever the door chime jingled, she half expected a suspicious figure to appear. Then, on Thursday morning, Harriet received a third postcard. It was yet another cryptic arrangement of shaped circles, triangles, squares, and now a sprinkling of faint stars. She noticed a small smudge of black ink near a corner. It looked like a fingerprint, but partial and smeared. Harriet's imagination soared. At this point, she was sure the postcards were signals for someone to enact a plan. On Friday evening, Harriet and Millicent armed themselves with binoculars, flashlights, and a thermos of strong tea. They marched out to the cliffs under a waning moon, trying to stay as quiet as possible behind the craggy outcroppings. The wind whipped at their coats, and the sea roiled below. They spotted the lighthouse's faint silhouette against the starlit sky. By Harriet's watch, it was a little past 10. For a long time they waited, taking careful sips of tea. Then, just after midnight, movement at the base of the cliff caught Harriet's eye. A dark figure carrying a small lantern was climbing up the jagged path toward the lighthouse. From the opposite direction came another silhouette, someone who seemed to be waiting at the tower's side. The two met at the old rusted door Harriet had used earlier in the week. A low conversation ensued, though Harriet and Millicent couldn't hear it from their vantage point. Finally the door opened, and the two figures disappeared inside. "Do we approach?" Harriet whispered, anxiety fluttering in her stomach. "Let's be careful," Millicent replied. They crept closer, using the rocky overhang for cover. Voices spilled out through a cracked window. Harriet's pulse surged. She recognized one voice as Russell Fane's smooth baritone. The other was sharper, more cautious in tone. "Hand them off tomorrow at the docks," Russell said. "After that, we're clear." The second voice responded, "What if the postcards were discovered? Have you left any proof?" A nervous spike made Harriet's heart hammer. She and Millicent exchanged alarmed looks. Harriet smothered a gasp, realizing they were glimpsing a full-blown espionage exchange. She remembered the mention of a shipment, likely something illicit, and realized that the postcards with the coded shapes must be instructions or confirmations. Millicent motioned that they should leave before they were caught, so they retreated to a safer distance. By the time Harriet and Millicent returned to the village, it was near dawn. They wasted no time heading over to Inspector Havers's office. The inspector, still rubbing the sleep from his eyes, seemed puzzled at first, but Harriet guided him through the story, the postcards, the secret gatherings at the lighthouse, and the mention of a handoff at the docks. At last they had enough specifics for Havers to open a formal investigation. That same day, quietly but purposefully, Inspector Havers arranged for a small team of constables to stake out the docks. Harriet, from the safety of the post office, felt equal parts exhilaration and dread. If her suspicions were correct, they might be dealing with dangerous criminals. Harriet had never been so deeply entangled in anything so serious. but she reminded herself that the postcards she'd observed were genuine, and the men's conversation had sounded anything but innocent. Shortly before dusk, Harriet received word from Millicent that the constables had been stationed discreetly behind shipping crates at the harbour. The plan was to catch the conspirators in the act. Harriet tried to keep herself busy, stamping packages and sorting out the last mail run for the day, but her thoughts drifted to the waterfront. Would Russell appear with contraband? And who was he meeting? Each minute seemed to crawl. Finally, as the clock outside chimed 8, a young constable burst into the post office. Breathless, he said, "They need you at the dock, Miss Grayson. Inspector Havers wants a witness who can identify the suspects, specifically Mr. Fane." Harriet's nerves broke into a flurry again, but she mustered her courage. She removed her apron, grabbed her coat, and locked the post office door behind her. The constable led her at a brisk pace down to the docks, where the water's dark surface gleamed under faint lamplight. Harriet spotted the inspector crouched between two stacked crates alongside another officer, both vigilant as they peered at a nearby pier. Harriet joined them carefully, trying not to trip. In the distance she could make out Russell Fane, standing near a small boat. Another man approached him, pushing a handcart laden with sealed wooden boxes. Harriet squinted. She recognized the black loafers from the Lighthouse. The men seemed to examine the boxes' contents quickly. Harriet looked at Inspector Havers, who nodded to his team. Quietly, they adjusted their positions, preparing to spring a trap. Russell took a small envelope from his jacket, presumably payment, and handed it to the man with the handcart. Harriet caught a snippet of their conversation. "From here, it goes on the freighter to Dunkirk," Russell said in a low but tense voice. "No mistakes." Before anything else transpired, Inspector Havers gave a sharp hand signal, prompting his team to move in. Flashlights burst through the darkness, and the constables emerged, shouting for the men to freeze. In the sudden commotion, Russell attempted to flee, but Havers was quick and tackled him to the ground. The other man tried to push the handcart into the water, presumably destroying evidence, but was grabbed by two officers. Harriet, her heart pounding, watched as the pair were taken into custody. She recognized Russell's look of sullen resignation as he was led away in handcuffs. Over the next few days, the details of the operation emerged. The crates contained stolen technological components, small but valuable devices rumored to be for advanced surveillance equipment. The postcards served a dual purpose, ensuring no electronic trace of the operation was left through phone or email, while conveying coded updates about shipping times and routes. The hush-hush nature of mail gave them a convenient cover. Russell Fane, as the real estate agent, had used his business as a front to camouflage transactions. The old Lighthouse offered a remote meeting spot where instructions could be prepared without prying eyes. Silverwood Cross, typically so serene, buzzed with the news for weeks. Everyone wanted details, but Harriet disclosed only what Inspector Havers declared safe to share. She was thanked personally by the inspector for her vigilance. "You did good work, Harriet," he told her with a warm smile. "Without your eagle eyes, we might never have uncovered this ring." At the post office, Harriet and Millicent replayed their incredible adventure for themselves more than once. It all felt so surreal. Harriet, the quiet postmaster, inadvertently stumbling into espionage thanks to a series of strange postcards with unusual postmarks. In the end, Harriet recommended returning the rubber stamp to the authorities, but Inspector Havers insisted she keep it, saying it might make a unique bit of memorabilia for the small village archives. She accepted it, albeit with some reluctance, placing it in a display case in the post office's corner. It served as a reminder of the unforgettable events and sealed Harriet's place as one of the village's unofficial protectors. Things soon returned to their normal rhythm. Letters and parcels resumed their usual flow, and Harriet's days were again marked by regular deliveries and friendly chatter. Yet she felt a distinct change in how neighbors approached her. The modest postmaster was now considered something of a local hero. Whenever Harriet passed the bakery or the florist's, she'd receive a wave or a hushed acknowledgement of gratitude. "Morning, Harriet. Glad you're keeping an eye out." Or, "Saw the paper, thanks, for protecting our community." These gestures warmed Harriet's heart, though she humbly insisted she'd only been doing her job. For her part, Millicent was thrilled to have participated in thwarting what she gleefully labelled the Silver Cross spy ring. She resumed her library work with renewed interest in postcards and encryption. Now and then, Harriet would catch sight of her friend flipping through an old cryptology volume, searching for references to shapes and patterns used historically in covert messages. Harriet would just smile. If more suspicious postcards ever turned up, she knew exactly who to call on. Indeed, Harriet occasionally found herself glancing out the window at the horizon, where the lighthouse stood defiantly against the rocky shore. It still looked lonely and forsaken, battered by wind and tide. But she couldn't dismiss its significance any longer. It had been the epicenter of their mystery, and might have further secrets hidden in its walls. Harriet had no desire to investigate beyond what she and Millicent had already uncovered, but a small part of her felt a thrill whenever she remembered that dusty journal and the faint footprints in the keeper's room. The rusted old tower had proved to be more than a relic. On an evening not long after Russell Fane was taken away, Harriet found a last loose end to tie up. While cleaning her counter, she discovered the second postcard, hidden under a drawer, forgotten in the mess of all the excitement. She placed it carefully in a small envelope marked Evidence, planning to hand it over to Inspector Havers. But when she turned it over, she noticed a faint scribble she'd overlooked, a flick of ink near the triangles that looked almost like a letter. She squinted, feeling a pang of curiosity. Was it an accidental penstroke or a disguised sign? Ultimately, Harriet chose to slide the postcard into the envelope and seal it. Better to let the professionals examine it. Before heading home, she paused by the display case where the Silverwood Lighthouse stamp rested. The memory of that nerve-wracking night at the lighthouse flickered through her mind. She then recalled how nice it was to settle back into the comfortable pace of village life. Brushing a speck of dust from the case, she flipped the light switch off, locked the post office doors behind her, and headed up the lane, lulled into peace by the calming hush of ocean waves. If nothing else, Harriet had discovered something important about her community and its beloved vestiges of the past. Even in a gentle place like Silverwood Cross, hidden dangers and old structures could house dark secrets. Yet at the same time, she realized how supportive her small town could be. When an odd puzzle turned up like postcards from an abandoned lighthouse, neighbors banded together and justice prevailed. As Harriet climbed the hill toward her cottage, she gave one parting glance at the horizon. The lighthouse tower was barely visible in the twilight, but Harriet felt its presence, mysterious and enduring. She smiled, reassured in the knowledge that any further strange postcards would have no chance of eluding her watchful eyes.